Today we're going to get right to the lesson. We're going to see through the story of Gideon that it's okay to ask God to confirm His will for your life. God, can you give me proof? And when God does confirm His will, we have the responsibility to obey and take action on what God wants. Last week, and just previously in the book of Judges, we saw how the prophet Deborah and the leader Barak led Israel to their freedom. So Barak and Jael led the army of Israel and provided freedom from their captors. And for a period of 40 years, there was peace in Israel, and Israel served God. But then Israel began doing what they do, and they began chasing other gods. They began serving other gods and turned their back on Yahweh, the one true God, or the eternal. And when that happened, when they turned their back on God, God said, if you don't want to live with me, then I'll let you handle it on your own. And then Israelites were persecuted by the Midianites. It's a big group of people who came in and they started stealing the grain. They burnt their fields, killed their livestock, stole their livestock. And then the people of Israel started crying out to God and asking God for help. So God sent a prophet and said, I'm going to send someone to deliver you. That's where we find Gideon. Gideon was a man who was down in a pit thrashing his wheat. He was down in this pit because if he would have been up on the land, the Midianites would have seen him thrashing the wheat and they would have came and stolen his wheat. So he's down in this pit hiding from the Midianites when an angel of the Lord came to him and said, Mighty warrior, God's going to lead you to free the Israelites. Gideon responded by saying, I think you've got the wrong guy because I'm the weakest person in my family, and my family is the weakest family in our clan. There must be something wrong. The Lord, the messenger from God, said, you don't have to worry because I will be with you. Now, what Gideon heard in his own language was actually this. What the Lord said to him was, I am will be with you. And with that one phrase, Gideon understood that the same God who led the Israelites out of Egypt through Moses was going to be with him. I am is who spoke to Moses. And now I am is standing in front of Gideon, giving him command to lead the Israelites. Well, Gideon asked for confirmation. He said, can you just do me this one favor and confirm that it's really you? I am. He said, I am. What we know now is that I am. This is a handy dandy tip about Old Testament. Whenever you read, the Lord said, I am, now we know that that's Jesus speaking. For a point in time, Jesus would pop in to people's lives and say, I am going to help you with this. Gideon knew that the Lord was with him. But he said, can you just do me this one favor and confirm that it's you? So let's look at Judges chapter 6. We're going to read verses 17 and 18 and see the exchange between Gideon and the messenger from God. Gideon replied, if now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me, meaning it's really you, I am, the eternal. Please do not go away until I come back and bring your offering and set it before you. And the Lord said, I will wait until you return. So Gideon went and made an offering to the Lord, and then he brought it back out. And he set that offering on a rock. And the Lord took his staff and touched that offering, and immediately that offering was burnt up. It was a burnt offering. So then the Lord told Gideon, before we do anything else, go and tear down the idols to Baal and Asherah that are in your father's camp. So Gideon went that night and tore down all of the idols to Baal and Asherah that were in his father's camp. And he built an offering to the eternal, to Yahweh, the one true God. So this experience from hearing from God and then asking for confirmation and receiving it gave Gideon the courage, or not courage, but the confidence he needed that it really was God speaking to him. And just before he left to challenge the Midianites, what Gideon did was he went and called the strong men of Israel to him. And just before he left to challenge the Midianite army, he asked God for confirmation one more time. He wasn't asking for confirmation because he was trying to find a way out of doing what God wanted him to do. He asked for confirmation because what he was getting ready to do was going to jeopardize the people like his family, his clan, and the Israelites. It was a big deal, and he wanted to make absolutely sure that he was following God's will. Well, let's look in Judges chapter 6, verses 36 through 40, and see what happened when Gideon asked God one more time for confirmation. Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is wet, then I will know you will have saved Israel by my hand, as you said." And that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God, "Do not be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece. But this time make the fleece dry and let the ground be covered with dew." That night God did so. Only the fleece was dry. All the ground was covered with dew. The task that Gideon was facing seemed impossible, and it would only happen if God was with him. So Gideon asked God to do something that only he could do. If the same God who controlled nature was leading him, then it would be possible. So he said, "God, I need you to do something where only you can be intervening." So Gideon asked God for confirmation, and God confirmed his message. And then in Judges chapter 7, the next chapter, we see that Gideon obeyed God, and he started to lead the entire army, and God said, "Hold on a second." And he whittled down the army to only 300 people. He said, "Send all those others home." And with 300 people and Gideon's obedience, God freed the Israelites from the Midianite army. So the pattern we see from Gideon here is God spoke, Gideon asked for evidence or confirmation, and then Gideon obeyed. So instruction, God speaks, evidence, confirmation, and then obedience. I've heard people say that we shouldn't question God. The problem is I can't find that in the Bible. Sometimes people mean a few different things when they say that, but what we do know is that it is okay to ask God for proof that it really is Him speaking. We can ask Him for confirmation. I don't want to get talked into doing something by somebody who's a smooth talker, or I don't want to get talked into doing something by my own feelings. So we can say, "God, if this is you, can you prove it to me? Can you confirm your will? I don't want it to be the sauerkraut that I ate last night. I want it to be you." That is completely fine to ask God for confirmation. So there are times when we should ask God when should we ask Him? Well, some people are just really indecisive and they can't choose between Wendy's or Taco Bell. Probably not necessary to ask God to confirm your restaurant choice. But maybe you're considering a move to a different town, like New York or California, Seattle. If you're considering that, you definitely want to know that God's speaking to you. Or maybe you're dealing with a situation that has the possibility to affect a number of other lives. So you want to know, if this is going to have a long-term impact on people, I want to make sure that I am doing God's will. So here are some ways to confirm that it is God speaking to you. Like the easiest way is to know that you know that it's God. You might not be able to explain why, but you know God has spoken to you. The first thing that God told Gideon to do when they first met was, first, go tear down the altars. Now, this wasn't that difficult for Gideon to know, like this really is God, because the Israelites had commands from God that they should not have idols among them. But Gideon's father did. So when the angel or the messenger of God, the Lord, said, go tear down the altars, it was obvious to Gideon that that was correct. Now, Gideon could have gotten in a lot of trouble because for a son to destroy his father's property was a serious crime. But the way his father responded was interesting. When his father woke up and saw that his idols were torn down, the clan was in an uproar. But Gideon's father said, if Baal has a problem with it, let Baal deal with it. From this we can see that Gideon's father already knew that he shouldn't have those idols in his camp. Gideon was just strong enough to do something. He was strong enough to obey. When Chris and I were in high school, she needed to borrow my car for a few days, and so I let her borrow it. And inside my car, I had a case of CDs. It was full of music that I knew that didn't please God, but I had so much money in those CDs that I couldn't just throw them away. Well, the first morning after she'd borrowed my car, she called me to tell me that she'd accidentally left the door unlocked, and someone had gotten into my car and they had stolen all of the CDs. Well, the second she told me that, I knew instantly what happened, and I even told her at that time, it's okay. An idol in my life has just been torn down. Like, I might have even said those exact words. I knew that they needed to be gone. I just wasn't strong enough to get rid of them, so God had someone do it for me. I wasn't mad. Gideon and his father knew the commands from God about idols, and so there was no doubt that the destruction of those idols was God's will. And there are times when we need to know God's will, and we can learn it simply by learning God's commands. So these commands from the Bible tell us how we should live. So should I flirt with this other woman? I pick on flirting a lot because men are prone to adultery, okay? That's why. Should I commit adultery? Well, you don't need to ask God that. It's very clearly written in the Bible, don't commit adultery. So I don't need to wait for a voice from heaven to tell me to do what God has already told me to do in His Word. Or I'm thinking about leaving my church because someone hurt my feelings. Does God want me to leave the church? Well, God's already addressed that issue. He said that if someone in the church has hurt you, what you need to do is go to them and try to work it out. If they've hurt you, say, here's where you've sinned against me, and I need to be willing to forgive them. Or if I've sinned against them, I need to be willing to say, hey, I did this, and I'm sorry. God has already outlined it in the Bible, so I don't need to wait on a voice from heaven to tell me, should I leave the church because I got my feelings hurt? Because the answer is already there. No, I don't need a voice from heaven to do what God's already told me to do. But there's some things in life that might not be so cut and dry, like should I move to a different town? Or should I change jobs? Should I start a new ministry? As we weigh our options, we might not be really sure what we should do, and we want God to speak to us. So the first and most obvious, the easiest, is God will tell us, and He'll make it so clear that we know that we know. That's what everybody wants. It's clear and obvious. That's the best way. Now, I'm not referring to our feelings that, well, this is just how I feel. Sometimes I can get depressed, and my feelings could lead me to believe that God wants me to do something. That's not God. That's my feelings. Or sometimes I may be facing something and I may be so confident that, yeah, I can do that. I know how to do that. So this must be God. Well, actually, I'm depending on my own strength and not God. Sometimes we don't have a clue how it will work out, but we know that we know. It's not our feelings. It's not our confidence. we know that we know, and that's the best way. It's God. Obey. Sometimes, if we don't have that, there are other people in our lives that are godly, important people to us, that they speak to us and they confirm what God's wanting us to do. Now, this is something that you didn't prompt or you didn't bait people into saying. Like, most people aren't comfortable enough if you come up to them and say, I just feel like God wants me to do this. Most people aren't comfortable enough to say, no, that's not God. Probably what's going to happen is if you bait someone, I think God wants me to do this. Your friends are going to look for ways that God could make it work out. That's not the same as confirmation from God. Sometimes people are willing to tell us things that we want to hear. That's not what we're talking about. When somebody comes to us completely out of the blue, it's unprovoked, but they come and say, I just feel like the Lord wants me to tell you this. That's when we pay attention. God might be using them to speak to us. So how do we handle it, though, when we have conflicting information? There are times when I feel like God's trying to tell me something, but I can't tell what it is He's trying to tell me. Like, the most important thing to remember is that God knows how to speak my language. He knows exactly how to say what I need to hear, so I will understand exactly what He wants me to know. So if I don't understand completely yet, it's because God's probably still working in my life or in the lives of other people to get us prepared for something. Sometimes we go through this uncomfortable period of sensing that something needs to happen, but we don't know what it is. And when we face this dilemma, we need to be very open to times of prayer and listening to God, not listening to ourselves. Because what we can do is, am I trying to make this happen, or is this really God working? Because when we really want something to happen, we can convince ourselves, well, this is God speaking. Like, if you really want a new vehicle, every squeak you hear, every noise your car makes, you can take it as confirmation that, oh, this car's about to die, I should sell it and get that new shiny thing. Well, you probably don't need a new vehicle. You are interpreting everything as, well, this is confirmation, but you might just need some new brake pads, or you might need a new universal joint. It's not really God. Does God want you to change jobs? Is there something happening in your current situation that you feel like you might be pushed to do something else? Well, it could be that maybe there's a tough situation going on, and is it really God speaking to you, or do you just have some communication barriers? Maybe God wants you to develop your communication skills instead of a jumping ship. But if you already want to leave the job, then you're going to interpret everything as, well, this is a problem, so this must be additional confirmation that God wants me to leave. Are you basing your interpretation of the situation on your feelings, what you want to happen, or on what God really has planned for you? We can get to the point in life where we see what we want to see, and we say something is confirmation if we want it to be confirmation. There are other times when we don't want God to speak, so we try to not hear what He's saying. So if you have a difficult task or relationship issue that's coming up and you're not sure how to handle it, or you think you might, but I don't know if I want to do that. You know it would be difficult or uncomfortable, but you just don't want to do it. So you try to disprove everything that it is confirmation. And we start saying these like, yes, but. Like, yes, I know that needs handled, but I just don't feel like I have the skill to handle it. Yes, but. Yes, I know this would have an eternal impact on other people's lives, but I just don't know that I'm the right person to do it. I've got so much going on right now. Or, yes, there is a need for someone to serve in this position. But if I did that, I'd have to rearrange my weekends and my priorities. So we say, yes, there is a need, but I'm sure God wouldn't expect me to do that. Sometimes we can say everything's confirmation when we want it to be, and sometimes we can say nothing's confirmation when we want it to be. Those are based on our feelings. In both of those cases, we get to that point because we've lost focus of God speaking to us, and we're more focused on our own will. It's what I want or what I don't want. What we need to do is not lose track of who God is and how He speaks to us. So are these things that I want to hear or don't want to hear, or am I genuinely asking God to speak to me? So if we've been praying and we are willing to do whatever God wants, you can be sure that when God wants you to do something, He will make it obvious to you and you will know. At that point, you have the choice of obeying or disobeying. There are accounts in the Bible that when people don't know what to do, some of you may find yourself in this situation, I don't know what to do. Well, what we've been instructed to do is go off of the last instruction you know was from God. So sometimes even people with good intentions will give us wrong advice and we may feel confused. If you're confused and we're not sure what God wants us to do, use the last guidance that we received from God and stick with that until God confirms what He wants you to do. That unsettled feeling you have may be God preparing you for something else, or it may be God getting the entire situation ready for the next step, but it's not ready yet. So that unsettled feeling is prepare, and when I'm ready, I'll let you know. Today we learned that Gideon asked God for proof of what he wanted, for confirmation, and it is completely fine to ask God to confirm His will in our lives. He wanted proof not because he was trying to avoid doing what God wanted, but because Gideon was set on obeying God's will, and he wanted to make sure that he was doing God's will. We can be confident that God's willing to give us the same confirmation as well. If our desire is to serve God, it's okay to ask God to prove His will in our lives. Places we can find that proof, well, we can find it in the Bible. Has God already spoken about it in His Word? We can find God's proof in the counsel of godly people in our lives. Or we can find that proof because we know God wants us to do this, and anything else would be disobedience. I'd like to end with this question. How do I respond to God, though, when I know He wants me to serve Him? Do I give excuses of why I can't obey because the odds are so big? Or do I ask Him to confirm His will, and then once it's confirmed, I obey? Are we willing to do whatever God asks if we know it's Him? Well, my hope is that for each one of us, we can get to the point, and we can even make that commitment today, where we can say, God, is this you? If it is, I will do exactly what you've asked. How do you respond when God prompts you, when you know it's God asking you to do something? Do you say yes or give excuses? My hope is that we will begin the life of complete obedience to God and always answer with yes. Hope you have a good week, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.